APU reviews have historically proven binary. Either it's better to buy a DGPU and a dirt cheap CPU, or it's actually a decent deal. There's zero room for middle ground in a market that's targeting $150 to $180 purchases. There's no wishy-washiness here. It's just either it's good or you skip it. Preceding our Raven Ridge 2400G benchmarks, we decided to test the G4560 and R3 1200 with the best GPU money can buy, because it's literally the only GPU that money can buy. All the other ones are gone. Before getting to that, this video is sponsored by Dollar Shave Club, makers of the new $5 Shower Shave Starter Set. The kit includes the Dollar Shave Club Executive Razor, bearing the heft of any high-quality tool, and also includes reloadable cartridges. The $5 kit includes everything you see on the screen now, like the body wash and shave butter, and can be refilled for a few dollars a month. This deal is available for $5 exclusively using our link below or dollarshaveclub.com/gamersnexus. So we're using a GT 1030 with those, and coupled with the G4560, that lands at about $160, which just so happens to be about what the new Ryzen APUs are priced at. And then with the R3 1200, we landed at $180 for both together, which is about $10 more than the 2400G. So it's a good price point and lands between the two. So today we're only talking gaming performance. This is not like a power analysis, thermal analysis, because frankly at this price point, the amount of people who care in that is very low. When you're fighting over a couple of watts difference, trying to get a part that's like combined under $200, it's fair to say that the real thing here we care about is the frame rate performance. And in our APU reviews, we will do power and thermals as always, but for today, we're just gonna set a baseline. So the 2400G is coming in for testing. We'll have it within a couple of days of this video going live, and we're pre-testing this stuff to get you an idea of where it falls, because historically with AMD APUs, with the previous FX ones, a lot of them really ended up in a place where you kind of get through the end of testing and you look at it, sit back, and you're like, why wouldn't I just buy a cheap $80 graphics card and the lowest end but still reasonable CPU I can get? And generally that was the better solution. Now, however, AMD has gone to Ryzen and Vega architectures. These are two gigantic differences, and that philosophy might not apply anymore. So we'll have to test the Raven Ridge APUs, as they're called, and see what it boils down to once those come in. Now, another big thing here to consider is the memory compatibility and the needs of an APU. An APU is one of the few instances in gaming computers where you will almost always notice a difference from the memory speed. So almost always there's an impact, because what you're looking at is a shared memory pool for the GPU and the CPU, which both exist on the same chip, and there's no dedicated memory for the GPU, except for what's sort of dynamically assigned to it during processing. So you're also dealing with DDR, which has much different latency and speed properties to GDDR, or video memory. And that means that as we scale down the frequency or loosen up the timings, the impact can be compounded from what you would see with just a straight CPU. So we'll have more on all of that soon. Capacity comes into play as well. But for today, what we're doing is we're testing the G4560 with a kit of memory at 2400 megahertz. So we could run it at 3200 megahertz with a Z-series board. However, if you're buying a G4560, you're probably not buying a Z-series board. It kind of kills the whole argument of it. So we're running with its maximum supported speed on most low-end boards. That's 2400. And then for the AMD R3 1200, we're overclocking that, because we can, to 3.9 gigahertz. Pretty easy to achieve. It effectively becomes a 1300X plus or minus a bit at that point. And it's not a hard overclock to do. We're also running it with 2933 megahertz memory. Again, I could put a much higher frequency kit of memory in there, but we're running it with a lower one because with both these CPUs, you're in a budget market. It doesn't make sense to buy 3200 megahertz RAM. That's insane, because memory prices are also insane. So those are our memory speeds. For all the details on testing, as always, check the article linked in the description below if you have questions about other parts or methods that were used in testing. And we'll talk about more of this once the APUs get in. But for today, let's get started with a couple of the esports titles, Rocket League, Overwatch, so forth. And then we'll get a couple baseline titles in there with all of our other CPU and GPU numbers in the past, just to establish where this thing can land when coupled with either an R3 at about $100 or a G4560 at about $80. Starting with Rocket League, our goal was 60 FPS in the game, as we figure these esports titles would do best with lowered settings in exchange for higher FPS. Seems like a good sacrifice. We configured the game to high settings with world detail dropped down to quality, as they call it, and the result was a tie. It's clear that we can achieve 60 FPS average and reasonable lows on both configurations. For $160, the G4560 and GT1030 do exceptionally well here. We're holding 60 FPS somewhat easily, even with the cheaper memory, and the R3 alternative fares just as well. We're bottlenecked by the GPU more than anything, as made evident by the tied numbers, and the real test will be to see how AMD's Raven Ridge 2400G performs. We have one of those again coming in pretty soon, so that's really what we're setting up for. For now, we've set the stage for what the APU has to beat, and these parts, both CPUs and the GT1030, are all readily available, which means you're not contending with the GPU availability issues higher up in the chain. This is direct competition to the APU, with no real out available. Dota 2 is next. For this one, we tested using high quality settings and 1080p at 100% resolution scaling, which is what we always use. We saw more of the same here. Performance was bound at 63 FPS average, with the GPU likely contributing to some limitations here. The 0.1% low performance looks a bit better on the R3 1200, but we are also within margin of error. For all intents and purposes, these results are functionally the same. What is noteworthy is that the GT1030 and its low-end CPU partners are fully capable of relatively high-quality Dota 2 gaming at $160 to $180 combined, which is not bad. The Raven Ridge APU is the price point challenger of this, and again, we'll see how that does soon. So subscribe to make sure you catch that when we do follow up. Counter-Strike Go is next. For CSGO, we tested with a mix of high, medium, and very high details, pursuant to previous optimization tests we've done for graphics versus performance in this game. The configuration is in the article. For this one, the G4560 and GT1030 ranked at about 111 FPS to 120 FPS average, with lows functionally equivalent between the two configurations. As expected, CSGO is almost laughably easy to run on any modern hardware configuration, even a $300 gaming box. Overwatch provides another low-load FPS esports title. With medium settings, we appear to be bound again by the GPU. Both CPU configurations rank at roughly 61 to 64 FPS average, within variance for this title, and those are functionally equivalent. We're able to sustain about medium settings on this PC build, and not bad overall. For a non-esports title with the higher quality graphics, we can look at Ghost Recon Wildlands at 1080p and low settings. This puts into perspective how much a GT1030 will struggle with higher fidelity games. We're at 38 FPS average when running low quality settings, which subsequently look pretty bad actually. You really wouldn't want to play at this quality. Ghost Recon at very high is obviously going to be completely unplayable on this configuration, but let's get a chart on the screen anyway. The point of this is to demonstrate relative performance scaling versus our standardized GPU review bench, which does use a 7700K, mind you, and the GPUs listed. The G4560 doesn't matter much here, as the GT1030 is choking the entire pipeline. For perspective of scaling, we get about 68% performance uplift by stepping up to the next worst configuration. Total War Warhammer is one of the games where we leveraged our existing data pool just for some perspective. Although not really that playable or enjoyable on the low-end platforms we're testing today, benchmarking at 1080p high still allows us to establish some relative scaling versus other CPUs with our standardized 1080 Ti test GPU. Again, all the other CPUs were tested in our CPU reviews, so we had a 1080 Ti with those. With these low-end platforms, we end up at about 21 FPS average for the G4560 and the GT1030, or about 30 FPS average for the R3 1200 overclocked variant, also using the GT1030. This establishes just how much vertical headroom there is for components if we were to upgrade things, but let's move on to 1080p medium for a bit more realism, where we observe a GPU bottleneck at about 36 FPS average. With both CPUs roughly equally constrained by the $80 GPU, there's not a lot of room for growth here until we upgrade really both the components, although the GPU needs it the most. For one final relative performance identifier, TimeSpy shows us that the overclocked R3 1200 performs significantly better in its physics processing for this test, leading the G4560 by about 50%. GPU scaling shows us as roughly equal in both configurations, as you'd expect, with the RX 464GB card leading by about 60%. So this is where we get into the smaller details. ignoring the APUs, the reviews should be live when this video goes live, but we'll have ours soon. Ignoring the APUs, what you're looking at is a situation where for a couple extra dollars, you can significantly improve your performance by going to something like, well, if they existed, an RX 560 or a GTX 1050 or something like that. But they're hard to find right now. And frankly, not everyone can scrounge up another $20 to $40 to improve their PC build. So the question then, can you actually play games reasonably and be happy with something like this and an $80 to $100 CPU? And the answer is, depending on the types of games you want to play, yes. You can play esports titles, you can play Rocket League, Overwatch, Counter-Strike, Dota, anything that's similar to those games, you could play just fine. Even to a lesser extent, Total War. It'd be a bit of a push through some of the battles, but if you lower the settings enough, you can play it. It's not quite as enjoyable with those lower settings, but the esports titles optimize really well. They're naturally not that intensive, and so yes, you can get away with playing those. Anything higher end than that, once you start looking at GTA, Ghost Recon, things of that nature, anything with the higher fidelity graphics, it is going to be a problem. And it is probably a waste of money to buy something like this for one of those games, because you're going to end up in a year or less replacing it because you'll just not be able to take it anymore. So it's going to come down to what kind of games you play. And if the answer is, I play basically things that look like Counter-Strike, Overwatch, and Dota, and not much more intense stuff than that, then yeah, you're in good shape with these. The next question, of course, is should you buy an APU? And for that, I'll tell you to subscribe and check back within a couple days, because we'll have an answer for you very soon, hopefully on, I think, the 2400G that we have coming in. That's the interesting one from AMD to look at. So that's it for this one. Subscribe for more. As always, you can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly. And of course, that review should have more thermal and power data as well, so you'll want to check back for that. Go to store.gamersnexus.net to pick up one of our shirts like this one, and I'll see you all next time.